I had always wanted to travel. And so I joined the State Department, and my first assignment was DC for a year, and I asked for Vietnam, and because I really wanted to see what was going on there. And so they sent me to Greece instead, which was hard to take. So when I was in Greece, I again applied for Vietnam, and I was working for the ambassador from Laos, who was in for consultations in Greece. And so, American ambassador, and he said, well, why don't you come to Laos? And I said, no, I really want to go to Vietnam. So I got Vietnam, and I was a secretary, and I worked in the political section. For a man I still keep in touch with. And I later, after Vietnam, I was supposed to go to Yugoslavia at that time. And I said, well, I've been in this isolated country. I just don't want to go to Yugoslavia, because you weren't supposed to fraternize with the Yugoslavians and all. So I went to Germany. And I was going to get out after Germany and went back to Washington and ended up doing Kissinger shuttles. So got to see a lot of the Middle East, because we went back and forth at that time. And then I said, well, I have a commitment. I'm going to stay in. So the man I worked for in Saigon became ambassador to the Congo. And he asked if I'd like to go along. And so I went to the Congo for 3 years. Then I was supposed to go to Iran, and we had the takeover. So I went back to Washington and worked in congressional relations. And I ended up going to the United Nations to our mission there and worked there for about 8 weeks. And then I went to Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and my last post was Israel. So that's, I got away from Vietnam, but that was my life.
Well, while you were in Vietnam, though, what all were you seeing? What were you hearing?
While I was in Vietnam, we had like a 9-to-5 job. I mean, sometimes we had overtime, but we were, my section was, or where I worked, reported on internal affairs. But in the evening, I went out to Third Field Hospital and became a Red Cross volunteer. And I also was a volunteer at the USO. So I got to talk to a lot of GIs and see war is ugly. And you take these young, I still tear up when I see these young guys. They're boys sent out with weapons to kill, and sometimes, it's children or women or whatever situation they're in. So I talked to a lot of the fellows. Every Sunday I went out and I pushed a coffee cart around, bumped into a bed and knocked it down, so they took me off of that. But we went out on Christmas Eve, and we had eggnog and cookies. Some other friends and I did this through the Red Cross, and there was a fellow in bed completely bandaged. He had been in a grenade. Someone had pitched a grenade where he was, and he was begging for some eggnog. He was completely bandaged. They had to put a straw. And the next day I went back with the book cart, and he had died. It's like, this, his last little Christmas, I hope, from that.
That's not something you forget, obviously.
No, and it was, I think, I repressed it probably, but I went into Bob Matthews. You probably interviewed him. He started the Lessons of Vietnam. So I went into one of his classes, and it really affected me. I really did break down. So I suppose it was there. And I still think about it. I've read a lot about women in Vietnam, and I didn't go to any of the movies. I just didn't want to see that. Anyway.
Forgive my lack of exact knowledge, but was that the Red Cross? Was that what the donut dollies were, or is that something?
They were a
different?
part of it, but in the hospitals they had, the Red Cross was there, and like, we'd go out and do games, which sometimes were kind of silly. I mean, I went on the drug ward, and they were withdrawing, and we had these jars of beans, and they were supposed to count how many beans, and here they are trying to withdraw from drugs. One fellow offered me money if I'd go out on the street and get him some, because there were a lot of drugs prevalent. They would tape letters. I mean, I worked at the USO in Athens too, and you would tape letters. At that time you taped, we didn't have iPads and all of that. Or write letters, or read to people who lost their sight, that sort of thing. Yeah. But a donut dolly went out. I think Red Cross probably went out too, but the donut dollies went out to the base camps.
I knew there was a similarity, but I knew it didn't seem
under
exact.
probably a branch of the Red Cross. I didn't know too many. I mean, we went out to the base camps. Went out with the Jewish rabbi to help out once. So we got out to the base camps. Then we went out with helicopters. Sometimes we go to the beach in armored cars. We'd go to the embassy. To get to the embassy grounds, they always had mirrors to go under the car. We had a driver because we couldn't have cars there. So, I mean, someone, we'd call the embassy when we were ready, and they would pick us up or take us shopping or whatever. Gosh, it's like yesterday.
What were your, I mean, you weren't a combat veteran, but you were still over there seeing a lot of the stuff that was happening. What was it like when you would come back to the States or talk to people from the States just about being over there?
I joined the State Department from Berkeley. If you remember, Berkeley was the hotbed of protest. In fact, I worked in the math department, and they closed the math down, the department, so they could go protest. Well, one of the professors I worked for, I came back through Berkeley to get back to Wisconsin. This professor just turned his head and walked away, and people said, why did you do it? Why would you go there? That's not because of the danger, because they were so opposed to the war. I mean, that place, they were protesting all the time. And I probably would have too, had I known what it was. I mean, I came out of there so disillusioned with mankind, period. About other things that went on. I'll tell you after. I don't want to say it on. You know, when there are no restraints, if you don't have any moral fiber, you can do things.
What is it like now for you to talk about, be able to be around Vietnam vets now?
The reason I really got involved with this group is I moved down here. I'm from Wisconsin originally, and I didn't think I could go back to those winters. And my brother was teaching at NC State, so I thought, well, I'll try it. I can always get back to DC. It won't be so far to move. So when I came down here as a single older woman, it was a little hard to make friends. And my first job was at the state fair, selling Native American jewelry for some man out of Arizona. And during my break, I was walking around, and they had a booth at the fairgrounds. So I introduced myself, and they said, you should join us. Well, veterans feel the State Department caused them to lose the war, the political thing. So I said, well, I know how you feel about the State Department. They said, no, you need to join us. So they were my first friends. And I've stuck with these guys all this time. 20-some years I've been with this group. And I drop in and out. I get mad at them. I drop in and out. But they were really my first friends. And they are, what's amazing about them is they're so supportive of each other. They might fight. They might have disagreements. But any problems anyone has, they're there. They really are amazing guys. So I'm still there. I'm their secretary again. After many years, I was.
And you know that you're
Yeah.
from there. Has there been any? Was it always has they been welcoming to you? Or have you asked
Oh,
them?
absolutely, yeah. And we've gotten beyond that. I mean, look at how many years it is now, 75, 42
Well, 50
years.
since the start.
50,
This year.
yeah. Yeah, that's right. So, oh, we've gotten beyond that. Don't worry about other wars after.
You had to have an open conversation at some point about it with them, and just to put it out there and say, "Yep, I did this." This is who
You
I
know
am.
what? They have never really brought it up with me. No. No. We're past that.
Now you mentioned your brother.
Yeah.
Was he a veteran as well?
He was not. He was married and had children, so he was not drafted. He was in the ROTC, I think, in college. I think at NC. He went to NC. He went to Wisconsin. That's right, guys. And then, well, how I ended up in Berkeley is he was his professor. Ron was getting his PhD, and his professor took all of his PhD students, and they all moved out to Berkeley. And he also took his lab assistant, and I ended up living with her, sharing an apartment with her. But that's how I ended up in. My mother died, and I said, well, what am I going to do? I was too young to get in, or I didn't think about the Foreign Service at that time. So anyway, I went out to Berkeley. Ended up living there. It was a great experience. And then my brother had a fellowship to England, and I said, now how am I going to get there? And a woman I was working with had retired from the Foreign Service. And she said, why don't you apply for that? And that night in the San Francisco Chronicle was an ad recruiting. So I went over to San Francisco and signed on. Took a while to get a clearance because of all those protesters.